Welcome to the Salt Path, because that's what I'm walking on at the moment. That's the informal name for the southwest coastal route. And we're in the southwest, this is the coast, and this is part of it. Although a lot of people skip this because you're just walking out onto that headland I like. But what makes me talk about this? Well, you may have seen there's a bit of controversy about a book. There's a book called The Salt Path, which I have to say has got a really remarkable cover. It's worth getting just for the cover alone. And we'll come on to tearing off covers on books shortly, because it's all related. But it transpires that the story may not have been entirely accurate. So what was the story? Well, it was about a couple, and it all starts off where they allegedly get ripped off in a court case, and the judge totally ignores all their evidence of the justice of the situation. And they are cruelly turfed out of their house by a former friend. So what do they decide to do? Well, they have a small pension. They're on pension credits or something. So they decide to walk the coast path. And it's a couple. So there's the lady and her very ill husband, although apparently walking on the coast path cures all ills. In all fairness, I do see something in that, because I do come up here a lot just to chillax. And things, but I'm pretty certain it can't sort of cure terminal diseases, and you'll find out. So they do that. She publishes the book, becomes massively successful, lots of people inspired by it. She's written 2 more books. She's actually got a contract for a 4th, and this is going to become very interesting, because what's the 4th one going to be about? But anyway, it turns out that it's perhaps not entirely true. They weren't ripped off by a friend. The allegation is they embezzled £68,000. They agreed to pay it back. They put a charge over their property to secure the repayment. They didn't pay it back. They went to court, and ultimately the court gave them a year to sort it out. They still hadn't sorted it out, and they said, right, your year's up. There's a possession order on your house, so it could be sold to pay off the money. It also transpires apparently they have another property down in France. Oh god, that's a nice view down there. I don't know if I can get that in frame. So anyway, so basically the story turns out not to be entirely true. I mean, they did do the walk, and it's a lovely inspiring tale of sort of meeting friendly people and people helping them out, which I have to say is, I can well believe that. Just to go off on a tangent, barrister friend of mine, Paul Poundsland, who I am contractually obliged to say, don't agree with everything Paul says, but he's a proper eco-warrior. I mean, basically lives in a marsh. He's practically Stig the Dump. But he does all these long walks. He does little pilgrimage routes, and he just sets off with nothing, just like a lump of cheese in his pocket or something, and he sleeps in hedges and all that sort of nonsense. But people just put him up. People just go, what are you doing? I'm just walking like 100 miles. And it's like, do you want something to eat? Do you want to stop at our house? Do you want a beer? That sort of thing. So, people are kind. And I think that's another reason people are a bit annoyed with this, because it's meant to be a feel-good story, and it's all based on allegedly lies. I'm being very careful here, although I don't think there's any dispute about this. So the situation is, if you are aggrieved, well, do you have any legal recourse? What if you bought that book because you sort of thought that was an inspiring tale, and now it turns out the book was entirely on a false premise? Could you sue? Well, some people actually did this with another book. There's a book called A Million Tiny Pieces, I think, and it's about somebody's struggle with addiction and rehabilitation. And again, that was a massive sort of feel-good book. Lots of people, Oprah Winfrey promoted it, lots of people bought it. Again, though, turned out tissue of lies, basically. So this guy gets caught out. It's all false. So a lot of people sued in America. They did a class action saying we would not have bought this book had we have known the truth. And I'll come on to sort of generally misstatement and misrepresentation. But Random House, the publishers, they actually settled the case. They settled the case for something like, I think it cost them something like just shy of $2 million, I think. No, so more than, it's $2.35 million. That was it, sort of £1.75. And they actually paid out to anybody who complained. And what they said is, if you've got the hardback, tear out page 163 and send it to us. If it's the paperback, we want the front cover. If it's the audio book, we want some proof of purchase, like the packaging or a receipt or something like that. But if you send us that, we'll send you your money back. Because that was the loss, It's like, what is the loss? Well, how do you calculate it? The loss is the cost of the book. You can't really claim for consequential losses. Oh, as a result of this reading this book, I decided to take up drug addiction and cure myself, and it turns out it's not as easy as that bloke said. So they paid out for that. But what was the cause of action? It'll be misrepresentation. I need to talk about two sorts of related subjects, misrepresentation and negligent misstatement. What's misrepresentation? Misrepresentation is something that crops up a lot in contracts. Basically, a misrepresentation is where somebody enters into an agreement as a result of a statement which is false, and the test is, but for that statement, they would have not have entered into the contract. If they've done it anyway, then it doesn't matter, because the misrepresentation has to be, causative of something. It has to have made people behave in a way that they wouldn't otherwise have done. Oh, that's quite a nice bit of framing there. Right, remember this bit of grass? I'll put a stone here, because that'd be a good place to put a tripod. So if you enter a contract as a result of a misrepresentation, you can actually have a right to rescind the contract. There are two types of misrepresentation. There are negligent misrepresentation and fraudulent misrepresentation. As the name suggests, one is where you don't necessarily deliberately intend to mislead somebody, but you are careless or reckless or negligent. Fraudulent misrepresentation is where you deliberately tell somebody a lie. Under English law, it doesn't really matter which it is. You still have the same right to rescind the contract and or seek damages. We'll get very near the edge of the salt path here, but I'll spin around in a second. Now, what you've got to be careful of is when you enter a contract, there's a thing called the parole evidence rule, which generally says that the starting position when you look at a contract is you look solely at the contract, you don't go outside the four corners of the document, as they say. Again, that's a really nice little bit there. That's the starting point anyway. But people can argue and say, the parole evidence rule doesn't apply here because somebody, the misrepresentation means that, forget what it says in the contract, I wouldn't have even signed the contract in the first place, therefore I can't be bound by the contract. So a lot of people will put in what we call whole agreement clauses. It actually says, basically, this contract is the entire agreement, and anybody signing up to it agrees that they will not rely upon any alleged misrepresentations, fraudulent, negligent, or otherwise, to say they entered. In other words, it doesn't matter what we may or may not have said to you to get you to sign this contract. If it's not in the contract, tough. So, if you're buying a car or something and somebody says, it's a really good runner, and it turns out not to be, well, unless they've put in the contract, car guaranteed to be a really good runner. I mean, obviously you've got all your consumer rights legislation. So if you're buying as a consumer, like you buy a car off a car dealer, slightly different rules apply. But if you're bargaining with what we call equality of arms, in other words, you're just buying a car off somebody's drive, then no, it's just, you can't rely on what they said, it's just what's in writing. I mean, sometimes you get into this and say, well, what is the contract? So a lot of times you buy something, off Facebook or Auto Trader, there's not really a contract. You just send the money and you pick the car, let you pick the car up. So you start going, well, what is the contract? It's the starting position is it's a bit what we call carbolic smoke ball. In other words, here's the offer, here's my car as described in Auto Trader, this is what I want for it. You can accept this offer by giving me the money. So that's basically a misrepresentation. So like I say, have a read through any contracts you might have signed, and I bet there's a whole agreement clause in there that you didn't know about. So even if somebody lied through their teeth to get you to sign the contract, there's not necessarily anything you can do about it. What's misstatement? Negligent misstatement. It's a similar sort of vibe, but it doesn't have to be a contract. A negligent misstatement is one where you say something that is untrue, knowing that somebody might rely on what you say. And it doesn't have to be untrue, it just have to be incorrect. Again, you'd have to show any sort of ill intent here, or deliberate attempt to defraud somebody or trick somebody. It's just if the statement is untrue. So to give an example, somebody's playing or something, so is that safe? Yeah, it's perfectly safe to swim out there. Oh, I didn't mention the rip or the alligators or the sharks or something like that, and somebody gets eaten. Well, arguably, they or their family have a claim against me because I should have known that they would rely on my statement and to their detriment, which is why, incidentally, we always do the this is not legal advice, please do not rely on it, because you'll notice my disclaimer in the description. That's what we call a Hedley, Byrne and Heller disclaimer after a case, where basically it's about how you exclude or limit liability. It's very difficult in this country to exclude liability totally. You certainly can't exclude liability for stuff like death or personal injury. But you can limit liability. So you can, like say, I'm a classic example, not so much now that everything's digital, but when you used to send your film off for developing, there'd be two options actually. You could pay your sort of £2.99 or whatever it was back in the day, and all they guaranteed was, we will attempt to process your film. If we get it wrong and we ruin the film, we limit our liability to your money back for the developing and the cost of a new roll of film. Now obviously if that's your wedding snaps, you might be annoyed about that. But so long as they gave an option, said there's another option where we will actually guarantee for consequential loss. So if we ruin your wedding snaps, you might want to get everybody back together and retake them, and that's going to cost like thousands to assemble people and to rebook the photographer. But that can be extra. And if they say, well, if you want that, you've got to pay £100, because then they'll just take out insurance to cover that. As long as you offer the two different levels, then you're okay then. You're okay then. But like I say, this is something that, I mean, it's very interesting with the book, but it just illustrates a very sort of common theme generally, because I think most people, I'll have to do sort of taking you to an average consumer contract. There's all sorts of things in there excluding liability and limiting liability. Incidentally, it's a criminal offence to falsely represent that you're lawfully excluding liability though. And that's why you see those signs in supermarkets that say stuff like no refunds, but then underneath it'll say your statutory rights are not affected. Because actually they can't say no refunds. You are entitled to refunds in certain circumstances. If the goods are not fit for purpose or not as described or not as advertised, I mean the mere fact you go, I don't like this jumper anymore, they can, they're not obliged to give you a refund just because you don't like it or you change your mind. But they can't say no refunds for stuff that as a matter of law you have a refund for. But that's why they put the statutory little disclaimer at the bottom. So what they're saying is no refunds, but really, yes, you can have a refund. And that doesn't count as falsely representing that, they're not entitled to a refund as a matter of law. So if you've ever wondered why those signs say that, but yeah, maybe I should do that, just go through contracts. But anyway, there you go. I've literally walked a bit of the salt path because I came up one side of it and now I'm going down the other side of it. Oh God, it's so glorious today. It's been a really, really busy week. I mean, I apologise for the dearth of videos, but real world legal stuff intrudes. I mean, I can't really complain, it is my job. I mean, it doesn't stop me complaining, obviously. But anyway, as always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely useful, vaguely accurate. And as always, I'm now going to stroll somewhere to edit this while staring out to sea, although I think I've got a meeting later on where we're going to do some more legal stuff. Oh well. This is the life I signed up for. Just as I thought I got out, they pulled me back in again.